While there is so much helpful advice out there on how to improve your life, whether it be self-development content, tips and tricks, or maybe even books on living a meaningful life, I've found the most impactful and significant thing that has changed my life is my relationship with Jesus. And in this video, I wanted to share with you a bit of my journey and hopefully show you why following him might just be worth your time. Let's dive in. I've been wanting to make this video for a little while now, and I honestly wasn't sure if I should or not. I thought to myself, is this really relevant to my channel? Will my audience really care? And the answer to both those questions is yes. Well, certainly the first one is yes. The second one is we'll see. If you haven't gathered already, I am a Christian, and I'm not the least bit ashamed of my faith whatsoever. However, I am aware that this channel is not a Christian content channel. Most people probably come and click on my videos to learn a bit about maybe project management, maybe self-development, habits, food, etc., not to be told about Jesus. If you are new here, welcome, first of all. And if you don't know me, my name is James, nice to meet you. And I've been making 102 videos so far on this channel for the past 3 and a bit years, mostly around self-development, productivity, and a few other bits and pieces. And I've been thinking to myself recently that the central motivation behind self-development is obviously to improve oneself, to constantly be finding better ways of living. And for me, honestly, the biggest changes that have positively impacted my life, that have improved my life, have all come from my faith in Jesus. So, talking about self-development, all this kind of stuff, it would seem silly not to share them with you. So in the rest of this video, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey throughout my life, kind of showing you how my faith has grown and how it has positively impacted my life. Particularly, I'm going to talk to you about some of the biggest challenges I've faced, and then also some of the ways that God has been working in my life. And fundamentally, my hope and my prayer is that it inspires and encourages you, whether you are a Christian, you've been a Christian for ages, or maybe you've never heard of Christianity, or you think it's a bit ridiculous. My hope and prayer is that it encourages and inspires you. And if you are not a Christian, then yeah, you don't have to keep watching this video if you don't want to, but maybe you can just be curious and watch along. I will actually point you towards some more resources at the end of the video of where you can find out a bit more about the Christian faith and how to get a bit more involved. So let's get into the story. As a child, I grew up in a Christian family, which meant that believing in a God was just normal for me, despite for most of my friends it being quite abnormal. I knew that God loved me, I knew that he existed, but I didn't really know much more or experience much more than that. I do consider myself incredibly lucky to have grown up in such a lovely Christian family, with my parents and my sister really helping me in my faith over the years. But like a lot of other kids who grew up as a Christian, I found school really hard. I found it really hard to fit in. Partly because of my Christian faith, probably also partly because I was a bit of a weird child, but I also just felt like, because of my beliefs, because I believed that a God existed, because I went to church on a Sunday, I was just a bit of an outcast and struggled to make friends. To cut a long story short, I kept my faith throughout the entirety of school, but for me it was very much a process of surviving, holding on to my faith, holding on to what I believed in, without really doing much more than that. I wouldn't really ever talk to my friends about Jesus, and I'd certainly just try my best to fit in by swearing, talking about girls, probably not mentioning that I was going to church on a Sunday. I just was trying to fit in. However, during that period of time when I was struggling to make friends at school, I did actually meet a friend at church. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to mention his name, kind of to protect his family, because it's a bit of a sad story at the end, but I'm going to mention him a lot of times moving forward in this video, but I will refer to him as my friend. So this friend became like a brother to me throughout this time. I basically would be going to church just to see him and play football with him after the service. We'd often go around to each other's houses. Throughout that period of time, basically my house became a second home for him, and he became my best friend over that time. But this friend of mine really struggled with mental health and a lot of things throughout his teenage years. And this led to a lot of really difficult conversations, trying to support him, trying to encourage him to keep going. He had a lot of complicated relationships and a very up and down personality. And for me, looking back, this friend of mine was a massive blessing to me, because he provided me with so much friendship fun during a time when I lacked a lot of that. But possibly more importantly, he would always be pointing me back to Jesus and pointing me back to my faith in God. And I don't really mean in the sense that he would constantly be reminding me to read my Bible or to spend time with Jesus. I mean it in the sense that he went through some really flipping hard stuff. And for me as a young boy, a teenager, I found it really hard to know what to do. And I basically had no other choice but to fall back into my faith in Jesus for support and for care so that I could support him. So this takes us toward the latter end of my school years, and not only during this time did I have a lot of hard stuff to support my friend with, but I was also diagnosed in 2015 with Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory bowel disease. Effectively, it just means that I'd have really bad stomach aches, I'd struggle with like fatigue at times, and have various other not very nice symptoms to have to deal with. And for me, trying to get through my A-levels so I could get into university, while I was trying to support my friend going through some really tricky stuff, while also dealing with this Crohn's disease that I'd recently been diagnosed with, was really, really flipping hard. And at the rate that I was currently going on, I just wasn't going to make it into university. I was going to fail some of my exams, and it wasn't really looking good. And my parents could see that I was struggling quite a lot. And one morning when my dad was dropping me off to school, he stopped me and he sort of gave me a verse from the Bible, which was from Romans 5 verse 3, which I'll read out to you now. It says, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us." This was a verse that I really clung to for support during my A-level kind of years, and it's a real example of how God can love and support us. I believe that the words in the Bible are living words, meaning that they can actively speak into our lives and that they are effectively God-breathed words. And this is a really practical example of how that has worked for me. And I totally believe it can be the case for you. I think, if you want to start anywhere, look up Psalm 23, which I actually am going to mention a bit later in the video anyway. And by the grace of God, during this period of time, my Crohn's disease settled down a fair bit. I started a new treatment program. I actually had to stop eating food for an entire month and go on like these drinks, which were disgusting. But by the grace of God, my Crohn's did settle down, and I was able to focus on my studies and get into university. Luckily also my friend was doing a little bit better as well. He'd just gotten into university, which was a really positive thing. So yeah, the school years were challenging, but they did end on a good note by being able to get into the University of Nottingham to do mechanical engineering. While my school years were a story of gritted teeth and survival, my university years were actually the complete opposite of a time of growth and fruitfulness for me. When I came along to university, I knew I wanted to just get stuck in a bit and go along to Christian events and getting stuck into a church, but I didn't really know what it would do to me. Through joining the Christian Union, which is a society as part of the university where Christians would go and meet up every week, I finally found other people who were much more like me and who kind of understood where I was coming from in life, and that was such a breath of fresh air. And through that I actually met some of my lifelong friends. I met my wife, I met my best man, I met my other groomsmen, and I actually met them all on a weekend away before university started, which was called Fresh Away, and it's a weekend for very keen Christians that wanted to kind of meet other Christians before university started. And for me, it was just such a fruitful and wonderful time. I got stuck in and I had a great time in first term. And during this term and really throughout university, I felt like my faith went from what I would term a lukewarm faith, where I was just kind of surviving, to being on fire for God. I was much more enthusiastic, really wanted to get involved. It was also during this time that one of the older guys at my church taught me about the practice of reading the Bible every day. Now, for me, I knew obviously that was a thing I could do, but I thought to myself, why the heck would I want to do that? It's really boring. But he taught me about how it can actually be so life-giving. And really from that point onwards, I would do that. I'd do what I would call no Bible, no breakfast. And that really became a bit of a foundation for all the trials that were to come later on. This led me to getting baptized in spring term, so the second term of my first year of uni. I got baptized at my home church, and I recently watched back the video actually of my baptism. I'm sure you'll see some of the shots, but the testimony that I gave during that baptism service was that I no longer had fear of what other people thought of me, and that I had absolute confidence in God, which I don't think I'd had really before that. And yeah, that was the reason why I got baptised in that year. And then moving along into the second year of university, this is when I actually got even more stuck in. I actually volunteered to live in halls again for another year, supporting the first years and leading like a little small group for the Christian Union. I got involved with my church sort of student group as well, and doing a bit more leadership stuff, and just kind of got stuck in. Academically was enjoying things, but it was quite full on, quite busy. And then obviously 2020 hit in that later part of my second year, which was when COVID came along and just put a halt to everything. Now, for me, this first lockdown was actually a bit of a relief. As I mentioned, academically, it was quite full on. I was quite stressed with some things, and I was quite grateful for a little bit of a break. All of the exams got moved to online, pass-fail exams, which was, I suppose, quite helpful for me at the time. And yeah, it was a pretty okay first lockdown for me. Now, I mention that because in stark contrast, the third lockdown we had in the UK, which was 2021, so just the year later, January it was actually, I hit my lowest point. I really did struggle. It was when Boris announced that we were going to lockdown again, and I was just like, man, we've been here before. How long are we going to be in this lockdown? I felt really quite low, felt quite trapped, lost, unmotivated, and I didn't really know what to do. In fact, one of the first things that I did do was get my Lego down from the attic and was rebuilding my Lego Star Wars set because I just needed to find something to do. But then more rewardingly, I actually kind of took up a new habit that probably most of you who are watching have had this habit since the age of 5. But for me, I never really had it, and that was the act or the habit of reading. Yeah, I never really read for pleasure at all until about this time. And in fact, even the first book I got during this lockdown period was called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, but I actually had it on audiobook, so it wasn't even a physical book at this point. But I mention it because this book really impacted my life, and it's still probably the most impactful book that's not the Bible. And it was talking about 4 different practices relating to being a Christian, but it was very practical and relevant to the 21st century. I've actually made a whole other video about it if you want to go into detail, but it talked about 4 key sort of practices, and I'll just take you through them very briefly. First of which was taking a Sabbath day, which is effectively a single day, usually on a Sunday, for complete rest, delight, worship, basically just doing things that you love to do, spending time with family, eating unhealthy, yummy food, just doing that and setting apart one day a week. Slowing down, that's a bit of a rogue one, literally doing things slower, walking slower, choosing to go in maybe the longer checkout queue, which sounds crazy, but it was just trying to counteract the speed of our world that we're in right now. Another one was simplicity, which you can also use the word minimalism. So it was this whole argument that if we've got loads of clutter, loads of stuff, we can often have a lot of mental clutter, and that certainly I think was the case for me, and it led to starting to try and clear out a lot of my stuff. And then finally was this act of silence and solitude, which kind of sounds not very sexy, does it? It's not exactly something where you get really excited about, oh yeah, I'm going to go spend some time in silence and solitude. And it was quite a hard practice to get into, but why I mention it is because this was a practice that I started to experiment with, to try and do, where I just spend time in quiet with God, and it really set me up again for the future trials that were to come. Alongside, I mentioned my Bible reading habit in the morning, reading the Bible, spending time in silence. These 2 habits, which came at these 2 different times, were really fundamental for creating, I think, a foundation on God for the trials that were to come later on in my life, which I think I'm going to talk about next. And just a quick warning, this next part of the story may be a little bit triggering for people, particularly those who have lost loved ones, particularly in more tragic circumstances. So just be cautious of that. But if you do want to watch on, then I just pray God comforts you and encourages you through this story. So in late 2021, I started my placement year working as a trainee project manager. And for me, this was quite a big step up in terms of going from the university lifestyle into basically an 8 till 6 job, and trying to figure out life and how to spend time with God and continue to develop in my faith was quite hard. But it was a really good experience going into the world of industry. Now, before I go more into this year in industry, one thing I didn't really mention earlier around the whole COVID part was how my relationship with this friend I've mentioned was during that time. During that COVID period, to cut a long story short, it was just a really tough period for him. Now, clearly it was a tough period for all of us and for so many people around the world, but particularly for him. And one of the biggest blessings during this time was actually the ability for me and him and some other friends to play Call of Duty Warzone, and it just allowed an opportunity to kind of mess around with each other and chat about our mental health and how we were actually doing. We also actually lived 5 minutes away from each other, so even though it was locked down a lot of the time, we were able to go out on walks together and chat about life. All I could really do during lockdown was to pick up the phone to him, just be on the other end of the phone or on a walk like I mentioned, and just to listen to him and ultimately just to pray for him every single day that he would get better, that he would be able to find life a bit easier. And that's all I really felt able to do during those times. And over the lockdown period, we did actually see a lot of little mercies, as I'd refer to them, things that did seem as little answers to prayer. For example, he really did grow a lot in his faith during this time. He actually got baptized, I think, after COVID. He also really had a lot better relationship with his family over that lockdown period. He started to repair relationships and things just were starting to go a lot better in their family, which was just so lovely to see. And as we came out of lockdown, and as I said I was going to start my placement year, he actually was finishing university and going on to another job, going into the working world. And during my placement year, me and this friend did have good contact, certainly, but nothing quite as much as when we were living 5 minutes apart during that lockdown period. And I knew that year was still really hard for him for many reasons. But for me personally, I was getting more and more engrossed in my project whilst I was on my placement year, building a dog food factory, which was very interesting and stressful at times. But as 2021 rolled into 2022, I was getting more and more involved in this project. There was one morning in February when I was making my coffee, about to go to site and have a big meeting about a project program, when I received a text from my parents saying that I was to call them as soon as I got this text. And I knew something was wrong at that moment. I didn't know what was going on, I didn't know who it was about. And I called them that morning in my kitchen, and that's where they proceeded to tell me that my friend had attempted to take his own life and had succeeded. As you can imagine, I was in quite a lot of shock at this point. I didn't really know how to feel for the rest of that day. There were certainly moments of deep sadness, and as you can probably tell, it still is very painful. But at the same time, there were moments of real gratitude for him and the life that he had lived and his friendship that I was so grateful for. But clearly the dominant emotion was shock and just grief. So I had to take the next week and a bit off work just to kind of process and ultimately just to take my mind off things. For me, I found working quite challenging. I ended up actually spending a lot of time with my friends, a lot of time with my girlfriend at the time, Hannah, and another thing I did a lot of was climbing, actually, which was sort of a bit of my therapy at the time, just an opportunity to, I suppose, leave my phone in a bag and just climb up and down walls for hours with my friends. So yeah, that was the immediate aftermath. I spoke at his funeral a few weeks later, and I honestly don't know if I've done anything harder than that in my entire life. But I will say again right now what I said at that funeral, which was he was like a brother to me, and I will miss him deeply, but I look forward to seeing him in heaven. And I know confidently that my friend is in heaven, and that has been such a comfort to me. But I also don't want to mislead you in that just because I believe that doesn't mean I miss him any less. I still miss him deeply. But that knowledge that I know I'll see him again is a massive comfort. Now I'm a few years removed from this tragic sort of sequence of events. I can so clearly see how God has been working throughout my life and throughout that circumstance, despite how sort of dark it can feel in the moment. For example, I was very blessed to have such a good relationship with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, Hannah. The way she supported me and prayed with me in those dark times was such a blessing. And there were so many other sort of little mercies and little blessings throughout that time that I could go over, such as the friends I was living with at the moment at that time, who were just so helpful and supportive as well. And for me, this brings me to really the fundamental reason why I trust Jesus so deeply and why I believe he is the saviour of the world, why I believe he is real, is the way that he meets us in our suffering. For a lot of people, I think the biggest argument for the reason why they think maybe a God shouldn't or doesn't exist is due to the presence of evil and suffering in this world. And the first thing I'd say to someone like you, if that is you, I have so much sympathy for you. I know how it feels when you're in that dark place and it just feels like everything is against you and there can't be any good really in the world. However, I would like to present to you through my experience why Jesus is different and why the way we can relate to suffering through Jesus is so, I think, transformational. And to start off with, Jesus never said that this life would be easy. He literally said, in this world you will have many troubles, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And not only did Jesus, who claimed to be the Son of God, acknowledge that suffering was real, but he actually went through some of the worst suffering that anyone could ever go through. He literally had like huge nails hammered through his bones to hang him up on this cross where he suffocated and died over quite a long period of time. And not only that physical suffering, that pain, but he literally took on every single thing in this world that has happened, that will happen, and that is happening right now, that is wrong, that is messed up about this world, the things that we do wrong. He took that all on himself during that moment on that cross and paid that punishment for those wrongdoings. And as a result of this, of taking on all of our sin, his literal own Father in heaven turned his face away from him, didn't want to be, couldn't be with all that sin. And what's even more bonkers is that he never deserved any of that. He did nothing wrong, but instead he actively chose to go to the cross and take on our sin so that he could be in a relationship with us, so that he could know us better. He went through that suffering, he chose to go through that suffering. So for me, and I really hope you're still with me, the reason I follow Jesus and trust him wholeheartedly is that he is the only one who can truly understand the suffering that I go through when I lost my friend, because he's been through even worse. He's been through some of the most difficult suffering that anyone could possibly go through, and he understands how I feel in that moment. His heart breaks when bad things happen in this world, such as my friend dying. We live in a broken world that messed up stuff happens all the time, but the important thing is that he doesn't just leave us in this broken world to fend for ourselves. He actually came down into this world that is broken and took on suffering himself. And that's why knowing Jesus for me is so incredible, because he understands that suffering. And of course, clearly, because I now believe in Jesus, I can look forward to a future, a life beyond this life, in eternity, that is completely free of suffering, free of pain, free of loss. And that is the fundamental hope that I cling to. And I realise I've gone incredibly deep theologically there, maybe a little too preachy, but you clicked on this video, you know what it was going to be about. I honestly think the best way to kind of sum up what I've just gone through a little bit in a deep way is to actually read out to you one of the Psalms. Now, when I was preparing for this video to make it, and certainly to talk a lot about my friend who took his own life, I did want to check with his family that they're okay with this. And one thing that they referenced was Psalm 23. So I just wanted to quickly read out that psalm to you, because I do believe this is fundamentally what explains my central argument as to why I follow Jesus, is how he goes with us in our suffering. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And that's it. That's the fundamental thing, is that God is with us even in the darkest valleys. You know, as a Christian, I'm not in denial that suffering exists, and that is certainly a hard thing to grapple with in terms of the existence of God. But my God definitely does not say that there will not be suffering. He just says he'll go with us in our suffering. Yeah, and thankfully my life has been a lot more stable and a lot less big trials to go through, which I'm so grateful for. And what I can say looking back over these past couple of years, past decade really, is that I'm so grateful that I've had Jesus there with me through those trials. And ultimately that's fundamentally why I wanted to make this video, is that has been the most significant and important thing to help me through life. I love to talk about on this channel, and even not on this channel, to my friends, how to make your life a little bit better. For example, making a good breakfast like the overnight oats video I made recently, or how to manage your time better. I do love talking about those things. And I will continue to make videos about those things. But if you want my honest answer for what has improved my life the most, it's not overnight oats. It's absolutely my relationship in Jesus. So if any of this has resonated with you, and if you are still watching, then thank you so much. I hope you're doing okay. But if any of it has resonated with you, and perhaps you are interested in finding out more about the Christian faith and more about how to be in relationship with Jesus like I've talked about, then I'm going to leave a link at the top of the description, and that link will take you through to a website called the Alpha Course. There's no kind of cult vibes, there's no trying to sell you stuff. It's completely free. It's not going to hack you or anything like that. It will take you through this thing called the Alpha Course, and the Alpha Course is a worldwide sort of course in the name, that effectively is just there to explain the fundamentals of the Christian faith. It's not there to like try and convert people or to try and, you know, manipulate them in any sort of way. It's purely just a discussion group that usually meets in person. Usually you'll have a meal, so it's free food, you get free food, and it's usually other people who are also curious about life, and it's just a space to ask questions. And no matter who you are, no matter what your beliefs are, you are so welcome there. I've personally been on one. It was actually during lockdown, so it wasn't in person, sadly, so no free food. But I actually did it with my friend, which was still really helpful despite all the challenges that were going on. It was really helpful to remind ourselves of the fundamentals of what we believe and why we believe it. So you don't have to immediately sign on to a course. Definitely not going to, you know, try and press you to do that. What I would say is that on the website, you can have a little look around it, but there are some other testimony videos, probably shorter than this one, and they're more specifically testimony videos about the Alpha Course. Usually people maybe like you who haven't really had a faith, or maybe they're aware of faith, and then them coming into it. And if you're a bit skeptical, then maybe watch those, just because that probably will give you a viewpoint of someone who was skeptical coming into it and actually found that it was actually very good, very judgment-free, and nice to learn more about Christianity. So if you're still here, then well done you. Thank you so much for watching. Like, seriously, good job for getting this long. I don't know how long the video is going to be now, but it's probably quite long. But I just wanted to finish and wrap up with a final message. You will have seen in this video, I have not tried to answer every single question as to why I think God exists or anything like this. I've not even tried to lay out the physical evidence for the historicity of the Bible, the evidence for Jesus's life, death and resurrection, which certainly is all out there if you want to go and find it. Some of which will be in that Alpha Course thing I mentioned. But I've done that for a reason, because I wanted to show you that a faith in Jesus, a relationship with Jesus, is so much more than just evidence. It's much more about that experience of life with Jesus and how much better and more fulfilling it is. It's all about living in community, having people around you to support you, like I've mentioned. It's all about those practices, those habits that I've talked about throughout the video of reading the Bible, silence and solitude. All these things just, I think, develop and grow a life that is far more meaningful and worthwhile than anything else you can probably experience out there. So if you did want to go a bit deeper into all this, then do check out that link below. maybe try and find a local church and chat to someone. If you have a Christian friend, maybe ask them a bit about it, or feel free to send me an email if you've got any questions. If you also want to stick around, you can feel free to subscribe to this channel. This is not a specifically Christian content channel. This just happens to be a bit of a more specifically focused video on that. But I tend to make videos usually for young professionals, young adults, and anyone that wants to watch, really, focusing on how to be a healthy young professional through eating healthy food, having healthy habits, healthy productivity as well. Those are kind of things I focus on. So feel free to stick around, subscribe if that kind of stuff interests you, and I'm sure my faith will influence a lot of the videos I make moving forward. But anyway, if you made it this far, then flipping well done to you. This has been a long video, but I really pray and hope it's been helpful. So as always, I'll see you in the next video.